Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. It's my honor to have back with me someone I consider a very dear friend, someone who is an incredibly courageous freedom fighter, someone who 6 months ago came on our platform and spoke about the huge issue as it relates to the outsourcing, if you want to call it outsourcing, of not only our generic medications, but our vitamins and our prescription-grade pharmaceuticals to China, and the potential negative impact, and the negative impact actually it had already been having at that point, but how it could actually be magnified with ongoing, if you will, with this ongoing supply chain problem with China. Now, here's the interesting thing. You, our subscribers, were so taken by Rosemary Gibson's presentation. You demanded that I get this out to the public ASAP. And that's what we did. We put it up on our YouTube channel for the public to benefit from. And they did. But it's interesting. Some of the blowback I got from individuals that can be considered deep state sources were saying that for Rosemary Gibson and Dave Janda to be putting this information that was so negative toward China out, that we were racist, that we were xenophobes. Nothing could be further from the truth. We were just telling the truth. And when the deep state is confronted with the truth, they lash out at the messengers, and they demonize them, and they degrade them, and they slander and libel them. And this is the MO that the deep state goes to. And fortunately for every person, not just of our country, but the world, Rosemary Gibson does not, did not, will never back down from presenting the facts and the information. A little bit of background for those of you unfamiliar with Rosemary. Her background is incredible. She's an award-winning author, an inspirational speaker, and advisor to organizations that advance the public's interest in healthcare. She's a national authority on healthcare reform, Medicare, patient safety, and overtreatment in medicine. She has written critically acclaimed books, Medicare Meltdown, A Battle Over Healthcare, Treatment Trap, and Wall of Silence, in addition to her work that we're going to be speaking about today, and which we spoke about in our last interview, was China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. She is the 2014 recipient of the highest honor from the American Medical Writers Association for her outstanding contributions in the field of medical communications. Rosemary serves as senior advisor at the Hastings Center and a section advisor for Less is More in JAMA of the Internal Medicine. She is a board member of the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. Rosemary led national quality and safety initiatives in partnership with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, including pursuing perfection, transforming care at the bedside, and rapid response system implementation. It is my honor to welcome back, and by the way, you can visit ChinaRxBook.com. It's my honor to welcome back Rosemary Gibson. Rosemary, welcome back to the Insider Insight Show and the Operation Freedom platform.
Hi, Dave. It's really great to be with you again. So much of our world has changed, and the China RX issue is now more important than ever, and it's hard to deny that we have a problem.
It is hard to deny it, Rosemary, but for many, many months, folks did deny it. And they not only denied it, but they derided you for the information you put forward. Where are those critics today, Rosemary, that said all of this was fictitious and making a mountain out of a molehill, and that you were being, so hard on China and the situation?
I don't pay any attention to the, Dave. I just go out and present the facts, because it's not just the American people. This is people all over the world. Mm-hmm. Remember, it's not just medicines. We're seeing with coronavirus that there were 1 million N95 respirators that were sent to Canada from China that didn't work. These were meant for healthcare workers. The United States got 1 million testing kits for coronavirus that were fake, giving people false results. Mm-hmm. The UK got them too. They had like 3.9 million of those tests that were not right. And I just saw yesterday, NBC News reported this, that doctors in the UK were saying they had ventilators, like 60,000 ventilators from China, and they weren't right, and some of them may have been causing patient deaths.
Rosemary,
so this is all of us, no matter what walk of life you come from.
That's right.
And it's also important to know that 70 countries have banned exports of medicines and supplies because they need them for their own people.
Mm-hmm.
This is about survival. And no matter what your walk of life you come from, we all need medicine. We all want to be protected. And we want to protect our healthcare workers. And the source of this is China, and there's no apology. There's nothing.
Rosemary, let's give some folks some more foundation in addition to the statistics and information you just presented. What percentage of the pharmaceutical products in the United States are sourced from or through China?
Here's what we know.
Mm-hmm.
And I focus, Dave, on I talk about the generic drugs.
Right.
And generic drugs are 90% of the medicines people take here in the U.S. and what most people take around the world. For those generic drugs, China makes the core chemicals and ingredients for thousands of them.
Mm-hmm.
For the coronavirus drugs, for people who are hospitalized right now,
mm-hmm.
they need sedatives if they're going to be on a ventilator.
True.
They'll need antibiotics if they get a secondary bacterial infection.
True.
You're a physician, you know this. They'll need like norepinephrine or dopamine mm-hmm. to raise their blood pressure. These are, bread and butter generic drugs that have been around for years that make our healthcare system function in the best of times, and certainly now with a lot of critically ill people. So where do they come from? Well, if you ask people, as I have done, those who actually manufacture, these are the men and women in the manufacturing plants that make our medicines. So I asked them, where does this stuff come from? And they said to get the core chemicals to make them. And I went around the table. 90% of the market for these chemical starting materials are sourced from China.
So
the whole world now is competing.
So Rosemary,
same sources.
And you've pointed this out before. Many people say, well, wait a minute, when I look at the bottle, it says that this product was made in the United States, but made in the United States is different from where the original products were sourced from, correct?
That's right. If you go into the grocery store and pick up, say, a jar of salsa, it might have been finished or made in the U.S., but where do all the chili peppers and tomatoes and maybe citric acid as a preservative come from? Mm-hmm. China has a dominant global share of citric acid, by the way. You open your breakfast cereals in the morning. If you still read the box, mm-hmm. some of them are fortified with vitamins. Well, where's that vitamin C come from? Probably comes from China. But that's not what's on the label. So what China RX did, which nobody had done before, was to go upstream, not with the finished things we take, that we put in our mouths, but where do the core chemicals come from? Because that is where China has a chokehold. And here's another data point. Because there's no book, there's no public document that has this. So India, we know, is the largest generic maker in the world. But they are dependent on China for 70% of those core chemicals for their entire generic industry. And by the way, India supplies the U.S. with 25% of our generics. Mm. So all roads lead to China. And where did that data point come from? It's an official Indian government statistic, which they put out in the newspaper. And that's because, they're under pressure. You had a shutdown in China. Mm-hmm. Global demand spikes. In India, you're a country of 1.3 billion people, and you're the largest generic drug maker. They were concerned about whether they could care for their own people, let alone the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So what we have here is all roads lead to China.
And Rosemary, and this is another very important aspect of your work. Many people said to me, well, I don't take any generic pharmaceutical grade products, so I'm really okay. But as you have pointed out, Rosemary, vitamins, aspirin, again,
acetaminophen,
come from China.
the core chemicals come from China. We can't make the penicillin anymore. We can't make vitamin C anymore. We cannot make aspirin anymore. And, thanks be to heaven, I don't take any medicine, any prescription drugs. But someday you just never know.
Right.
And you want them to be there when you need them, just in case.
Well, let's talk about just in case. We spoke about this in your last interview, but bears repeating. Let's say, for example, you have hypertension issues. Not controlled by diet, not controlled by exercise, not controlled by other means. And your physician puts you on a pharmaceutical product. You had pointed out that several of these hyper products used for people with high blood pressure, in fact, were tainted in China, correct?
That's right. I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners will remember 2 years ago, there was the longest and probably the largest recall in history of blood pressure medicines. And that happened because they found carcinogens in them. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that the worst perpetrator, and very likely the largest globally, we're talking globally here, was the company in China that, here's how it happened. The drug was going off patent, the brand name drug. Mm-hmm. And so you have a bunch of generic companies that want to get that market share, which would be pretty big. And so the company that came out on top in terms of making it cheap or cheaper, they had to come up with a different chemical process to make it cheaper. And they did that successfully. It was good chemistry. But nobody was looking at the fact that this was a product that was going to be consumed by humans. And it turns out it was a carcinogen, a genotoxic impurity. And while a number of companies were selling blood pressure medicines that were challenging, this is the company making the active ingredient in China. It had more than 200 times the acceptable limit of this carcinogen per pill. And this was going on they were selling it for about 4 years before anybody picked it up. And when the FDA finally got into that plant, they saw from the company records when they do inspections, they saw this time, that the company knew it had a problem with its manufacturing process, that it didn't meet United States or even European standards, but they sold it anyway. And so they were making this core ingredient for a whole lot of other companies. So but it's hidden. It's like the rare earths. You control what's in what's inside, deeply inside. Nobody's probably ever seen a rare earth. You probably have never seen a chemical raw material for your drug, but we get the finished products. That's what China gained control over. And Dave, what's happening now, I'm seeing it on social media. People have told me. I mean, we're talking about some senior government officials and others who are saying, I can't get my blood pressure medicine. It's on back order for 3 months. And these are medicines especially now with a lot of stress people are undergoing, to prevent heart attacks and strokes. So this is what happens when we centralize the global supply of critical things we need for life and to sustain life in a single country, whatever it is. And in China, RX predicted this.
Yes, it did.
I went back and looked at, I think it was page 3, and it said, in the event of a natural disaster or global pandemic, if China shuts the door, the U.S. will be waiting in line and scrambling with other countries to get vital medicines. And Dave, if you don't hear this at all in the press, we hear about masks and gloves, but what you don't hear is the scramble for critical drugs and the core components to make them. Whatever people think of hydroxychloroquine, the core chemicals to make that are sourced in China.
Right.
And there are countries around the world that this is their standard, and they're getting good results. I'm not going to get into that debate.
Right.
But the point is, many countries are competing to get the same starting material from a single country. That's like if we had 80% of the oil in a single country and something happens with in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, and we're all scrambling to get oil from a single country, China, from 8,000 miles away. We would never do that. But we've done that for these critical drugs that are life-saving. You may not need them now, but tomorrow, if you're running out, whatever you need, we may not be able to get them.
Rosemary, the question comes up. Where were the CEOs of all these drug companies? Where were all these high-level government officials that want to tell everybody that they love people so much and they want to take care of people so much, and they're always looking out for the vested interests of the public, the American public in this case, through these government officials? Rosemary, these people were negligent for not just a year or years, but decades to allow this situation to get to this level on all those levels. Am I wrong on that?
That's right, Dave. I was on a phone call a couple months ago, and we were talking about the biodefense arena, and I said, it's fascinating to me that we have this whole biodefense establishment and infrastructure in the United States. And why did it take a private citizen like me,
right,
who was never paid to do this work, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it? Why did it take someone like me to bring this out in the open? What was it? Mm-hmm. And I'm still waiting for an answer. See, the challenge is these medicines have become commodity products, and they're treated like T-shirts. So let's just find the cheapest way to make them. Yep. And you assume that they're all equivalent, when in fact they're not. Mm-hmm. And nobody cares about them until you need them and they don't work. Mm-hmm. Or until you can't get them because a single plant blows up in China and you have a global shortage. That's what happened to a critical antibiotic to treat people with sepsis, which, as you know, can be deadly, is deadly for like nearly 30,000 people in this country.
Well, those of us on the front line, and as you know, I'm retired now, but several years ago, some of us were wondering why certain medications, which were lidocaine, for example, or just some basic medications that should be readily available, there came periods of time where all of a sudden there was a shortage.